Have you ever watched The Lion King? Well, you might be surprised to learn that some people think it got its inspiration from Japan. In fact, people think that Disney copied the work of the Japanese cartoonist Tezuka Osamu. Tezuka is famous throughout Japan, but his name is still not known by many Americans. In Japan, Tezuka was instantly recognizable. He was always wearing a black beret and a thick pair of glasses. His cartoons were just as easy to spot. They have had a huge impact on Japanese comics today. So much so that Tezuka is often called the god of manga. Manga is the Japanese term for comics. In this episode, we're going to dive into the history of manga and Japanese animation. This is the story of Tezuka Osamu and his journey to become one of Japan's most famous cartoonists.
Hi, young historians. It's time for another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, co-founder of Honest History. If you love drawing or studying insects, you're going to love today's story. We're going to learn about someone who drew cartoons. But these might not be the cartoons you're used to seeing. This episode is about one of the pioneers of Japanese animation. The best part? Tezuka Osamu started drawing comics when he was just 9 years old. Sometimes it can be easy to think you have to wait until you're older to do something important, but you can always start learning now. As you listen to this episode, think about the things you want to do when you're older. It may not be drawing, but no matter what it is, you can start practicing for it now. For example, maybe you want to be a zoologist. It may be difficult to go convince a zookeeper to let you help with the animals, but you can start reading about animals and learning about what zoologists do. That way, when you're older and ready to start working, you will have a huge advantage. Just like Osamu, who started drawing cartoons when he was young and became one of the best animators to ever live. Now, let's learn about his story.
Our story begins in 1939. Tezuka Osamu was 11 years old. He walked through the green hills near his home in Takarazuka, Japan. In his hands, he carried a notebook, pencil, and a net. While he walked, Tezuka scanned the ground and plants around him. He was doing one of his favorite things, hunting for insects. His favorite type of insect was a beetle called osamushi. In fact, his friends had just started calling him Osamushi. It was the perfect nickname because Osamushi sounded a lot like Tezuka's first name, Osamu. As Tezuka walked, he spotted something moving out of the corner of his eye. It was a butterfly sitting on the edge of a leaf. He quietly raised his net up above his head and paused. The butterfly didn't move. Then, with one quick motion, he swung the net down and scooped up the butterfly. "Got him!" he shouted in excitement. Tezuka raced home. He would bring this butterfly with him and study it. At home, he took out his notebook and started one of his other favorite things to do, drawing. Recently, he had started to draw the insects he found, but he also loved to draw comics. In fact, he had been drawing comics since he was 9 years old. He finished his comic and ran to his mother and father to show them. His mother nodded and smiled proudly. She always encouraged him to draw. Sometimes Tezuka drew so much she had to erase pages of his notebooks so he could reuse those pages. She spoiled Tezuka and her 2 other children by taking them to the theater and buying them books. Tezuka's father was a true comic lover. He had a collection of comics, or manga as they are called in Japan. Tezuka loved to read his father's manga. "My father bought anything new or modern," Tezuka said. One of these new things he bought was a home projector to watch short films. Tezuka was very lucky because few people had projectors in the 1930s. He watched his very first animation on that projector. It was an American animation made by a man named Walt Disney. The films did not have sound, but sometimes they came with a separate record. When you started showing the short with the projector, Tezuka explained, you'd count 1, 2, 3, and then set the needle on the phonograph. With that, the record would provide music and some dialogue to go with the moving picture. Tezuka had been in love with animation ever since. While Tezuka's home was a place to explore art and new ideas, this was not the case in the rest of Japan. When Tezuka was a little boy, the military started taking over Japan. Soon, it controlled the government, education, films, and books. Then, in 1940, Japan entered World War II. Tezuka was 12 years old. During World War II, Japan and the United States became enemies. American films like Disney animations were banned in Japan. The Japanese government thought that the cartoons and comics were silly and a waste of time, and sometimes even dangerous. Cartoons were only allowed to draw what the government wanted. Tezuka's teachers began to watch him suspiciously. They did not like that he spent so much of his time drawing comics. Sometimes they would take his drawings away. Thankfully, one teacher enjoyed Tezuka's comics. It was his art teacher. One day, his art teacher called Tezuka into the classroom. "I want you to keep drawing," his teacher said. "You could become a professional someday." For the next few years, Tezuka did just that. He kept drawing. When Tezuka was 16, he left school to work in a factory. This was common at the time to help with the war effort. Though the Japanese government did not want to admit it, Japan was losing the war. The country needed everyone to help if there was any chance of victory. Men joined the military, while older boys like Tezuka were too young to fight. They worked in factories instead. Every day in that factory, Tezuka secretly read and drew comics. He put his comics up on the wall of the bathroom so his friends could read them there. He often got in trouble for drawing instead of working. One day, as punishment, Tezuka was ordered to climb up the watchtower near the factory. He was supposed to watch for American planes and alert people if he saw anything. After Tezuka got to the top of the tower, he heard the sounds of an air siren. He looked up at the sky. There was a stream of US bombers. Within seconds, the planes began showering the factory with bombs. A bomb hit the roof of the factory just 2 meters below Tezuka. He tumbled down the tower. When he stood up, he looked around and saw houses on fire all around him. Many people died that day. Tezuka had barely escaped with his life. Later that year, in August 1945, the country received terrible news. The United States had dropped nuclear bombs on 2 Japanese cities, killing thousands of people. 6 days later, the voice of the emperor came onto the radio. "The war has lasted for nearly 4 years. Despite the best that has been done by everyone, the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Should we continue to fight? Not only would it result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also would lead to the total extinction of human civilization." The emperor told the Japanese people it was time to surrender. Many people began to cry. All this time, they believed Japan would win. Japan was about to change in a way that Tezuka never expected. After the war, Japan was occupied by the United States. There were many cultural misunderstandings between the Japanese people and the American soldiers. Tezuka was punched one night by a group of American soldiers who could not understand what he was saying. Many people in Japan also did not have enough to eat during those early days of occupation. It was hard to see his once proud nation suffering. These experiences influenced Tezuka's drawings. He believed that it was important for other cultures to understand one another. He felt that comics were a way to bring people together and share each other's culture. Tezuka was beginning a new chapter in his life. He had applied to medical school and was accepted. All through medical school, Tezuka listened to the words of his art teacher. He kept drawing. It was an interesting time to be an artist in Japan. The United States promoted the idea of freedom and democracy. Suddenly, it was okay to criticize the government and even the emperor. Comic artists felt free to create when they wanted, and there was an explosion in manga. American films and comics, which used to be banned, were everywhere. Tezuka went to the movie theater to watch the films he missed during the war. Some of his favorites were Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Bambi. When Snow White was released, I spent all my savings in no time, Tezuka said. I probably saw it about 50 times. Bambi, I watched over 80 times. Once I'd memorized all the scenes, I looked at other people in the audience. Seeing them laugh and cry made me happy as if they were my own audience. However, the United States started to censor Japanese media in different ways. It did not like things that promoted the old ways of Japan. The US censored comics about martial arts like judo and karate, and banned comics about the samurai. Editors and readers were looking for something entirely new. Something that was not about the Japan of the past, but the Japan of the future. This gave Tezuka an idea. He imagined a future where Japan focused on science. He began drawing a character that would make him famous. This character's name was Adam. Who was Adam? Well, Adam was a robot boy with shiny black hair and tall boots. He had an IQ of 300 and the strength of 1,000 horsepower. He traveled to outer space and met aliens. His legs turned into jets so he could fly through the sky. And his eyes turned into searchlights so he could see in the dark. While a robot may not seem like a crazy idea today, back in the 1950s, it was entirely new. When Tezuka first drew Adam, there were no TVs or computers in Japan. There were no space satellites or even astronauts. Children across Japan loved the futuristic robot. Adam would go on to inspire thousands of Japanese children to become scientists. For many years, Tezuka worked as both a cartoonist and a doctor, switching back and forth. During this time, Tezuka's comics became more famous throughout Japan. Next, Tezuka decided to work at a big animation company, but he soon became frustrated. Working with people really was difficult, he said. Tezuka did not agree with the other animators on his team. He wanted to have more control over his stories. In 1961, he decided to start his own company. He called it Mushi Productions. Do you know what Mushi means in Japan? I'll give you a hint. It's something he's loved ever since he was a little boy. Mushi means bug. By this time, more people in Japan owned TVs. Mushi Productions began turning many of the Tezuka comics into animated TV shows. One of his most famous shows was about Adam, the boy robot. It was called The Mighty Atom. Then he received some exciting news. The American television company NBC wanted to show his TV shows in the United States. Soon enough, American children could watch Adam fly across their TV screens. In the United States, Tezuka's show was called Astro Boy. Tezuka would never forget his first trip to the United States. It was in 1963, the year NBC started showing Astro Boy on TV. He arrived in New York City. While he was walking down the busy street, he saw a group of boys. He wanted to speak to them. "I will give you a dime each if you answer my question," he said to the group of boys. "Do you know Astro Boy?" "Of course I do. You don't know it?" one of the boys answered. Tezuka was so happy he jumped up and down. When he was a young boy in Japan, Tezuka had watched Disney animations over and over again. Now these American children watched his animations. Astro Boy wouldn't be his only popular show in the United States. Tezuka's other TV shows called Kimba and the White Lion was another hit. Many fans believe that this TV show inspired Disney's The Lion King, though Disney refuses to say it copied any part of his work. Throughout his long career, Tezuka created hundreds of different comics and animations. His work would have a huge impact on how manga and anime looks today. Life as a cartoonist is not easy and requires a huge amount of work. But even through the difficult years, Tezuka would never forget the things he loved as a young boy. During an interview, he was asked two different questions. What would you do if you had no income at all? Collect insects, he said. What is the one thing you would take on a trip to outer space? His answer? A pencil and notebook. No matter where he went, he wanted to keep drawing.
Welcome back. Now that was a great story. Not only did we learn about a young boy who became an incredible artist, but we also learned an important lesson about perseverance and sticking with what you love, even when it becomes difficult. For Tezuka, it took a lot of courage to continue drawing, even though his country was at war. But in the end, it paid off. People around the world today admire his artwork. His drawings inspire kids and adults to go on adventures, even if those adventures are through imagination. If you want to learn more about Japan, check out issue 16 of Honest History magazine. You'll discover the life of samurais and so much more about this amazing country and culture. You will even learn about fixing household objects using an ancient Japanese art form. That's all for now, but we'll see you all next time. This episode was hosted by Cameron Peloso and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Randall Lawrence. To learn more about this episode, including more about the host, visit us at honesthistorymag.com and follow along for updates on social media at Honest History.